Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Statewide Homeless Council meeting. So glad you could join us today. We're meeting today on Tuesday, July 9th, and wanted to just say hello to everybody and welcome. As you know, we start each of these meetings of the Statewide Homeless Council with a moment of silence for those that we have lost while experiencing homelessness in the state. And so I'd ask for your patience as we just take a moment of silence of remembrance. Thank you. Another way that we like to start our meetings is to reflect on the fact that this work is tough and that we oftentimes see people in moments of crisis and trauma. And so I'd like to take a moment at the beginning of each meeting to start off with a moment of inspiration or reflection. And I have typically asked the council members to go round robin with that and to share their own reflection moments with us. And so I think Andrew Lardy is here from Tedford Housing, who I've reached out to this morning. And I'm going to turn it over to him to share a few words with us. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Rich. Morning, everybody, and grateful for the chance to share something here. This is an excerpt from a poem. The poet is named Barbara G. Walker. The poem is called The Woman of the Mountain, and this is an excerpt that I found in the Book of Blessings. And I will screen share the window maybe so you can see it if I'm smart enough to figure that out. Let's see. I don't want to slow us down too much. Window. Here we go. Here it is. All right. And I'll read it. Thousands of years of history have passed, and during all that time, human beings have fought, killed, plundered, and wronged each other in every possible way. Of such stuff, history's made. But also during that time, other human beings have quietly and patiently persevered in the development of the arts, crafts, inventions, ideas, and programs. From the millions of creative persons, most of them unnoticed and unknown in the upheavals of history, have come the good and lasting things in the sum of human culture. And when I read this, I did a double take because I thought it was sort of your classic thing of like, oh, great, the artists, what a privilege for them to go out there and get a little bit of belated recognition by like creating cool stuff while we're all busting our asses. And then I noticed that at the end of their list is the word programs. So they tucked in the administrators, and I just thought that's so sweet. Like I envy and appreciate the artists who move me and give me a break from work, and I thought, well, look, we're in there on the list with the inventors, and that felt good. I felt good being seen by Barbara Walker.
That is excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. And yes, it is good for everyone to be seen and appreciated in this short life that we have. So thanks for sharing those words. It was very, very helpful for us. Well, we have a regular agenda actually today. Frankly, we have some update reporting. We're going to start with a policy update, then move on to updates from the hubs and the regions. We're going to take a little bit of a break to talk a little bit about the new gaps analysis that's happening here in the state. Answer some questions about kind of any updates people have around affordable housing production in the state. And then we will end with a longer conversation today with the council as we think about planning an interagency summit on homelessness for the state agencies this fall. I want to get some feedback from the council about how to organize that event. And so we're going to have a little bit of a discussion at the end about what would be important to share during the summit. And I want to get your feedback. So, but the thing I wanted to start off today is in recognition that, of course, our legislative session just ended here in 2025. And there was a flurry of activities as there normally is. But I thought it would be good to have kind of an update on kind of where we stand on our policy recommendations and what was accomplished and kind of what is still left on the table to be looked at in 2026. And I've asked Cullen Ryan, the chair of our policy committee, to make a short comments with us this morning to give us an update on kind of where things landed on the legislature. So Cullen, welcome to the meeting, and we're so glad you could join us today.
And let's see if I can share this. Can you guys see this?
We can.
Okay, let's see if I can there. Okay, so to start with, the Maine Homeless Policy Committee took a look at the statewide homeless council policy objectives that were put out in 2023 going into 2024. And it's apparent that we've got a stuck system, very little outflow. And so the three goals the statewide homeless council had come up with was prevention, keeping people from finding a shelter, making sure that people got that, and housing. And so flowing from that, we pushed for 3 bills that would help with each of those things. We vetted these with the statewide homeless council, with the continuum of care, with all 3 regional homeless councils, and we did that numerous times to make sure that we were in the right direction. And these were the bills, as you are probably familiar. These were submitted by Senator Rachel Talbot Ross. The first was an act to sustain emergency shelters, 698. Next was an act to create housing stability services, and this was both outreach case managers as well as housing stability workers. And then the third was to have general assistance really become a vehicle for paying for the sheltering people who need it. So those were our bills. The first, I'll just go through each one. The homeless shelter bill was passed to be enacted by each chamber. It is still awaiting the governor's signature as of this morning. It will provide $4.473 million for funding the operations. Those funds are actually.
Cullen,
Yes.
there's something on your screen. There's an orange thing that seems to be in the way of one of your slides.
Sorry.
That says "Give subtitles a try." Can you get rid of that?
Got it.
It looks like they're
Thank
trying
you.
to help you, but it's not being helpful.
I love it when my computer tries to help me. It's really nice.
Yes.
So thanks for letting me know that. Oh, look at this. It's now dictating what I'm saying. That's fantastic. I didn't know how to shut that off. If anybody does.
Yeah, that's okay. I think as
Sorry.
long as we can see the slides, it's probably fine.
Okay,
I
good.
just wanted to make you aware. I'm sorry to even ask.
It's the invasion of AI, I guess. So anyways, this will fund 1 year of the shelters, and the funding comes the unencumbered resources from LD2, which is, I think, a reasonable source. But notably, it doesn't cover the second year of the biennium. So we have further work to do to make sure that we get that to happen. 1910, this bill was for the, again, housing stability services, getting workers out there to get people out of shelters and get people out of encampments. This was carried over to the regular session next year. It was amended. It went back and forth a bit, and the original was to hire these 18 workers. But the amendment was to create an emergency clause requiring DHHS to report out what it was doing from LD2 to hire the 10 housing stability workers that were required from that. So that looked like that was going, and then it ended up being carried over to next year. So we'll keep advocating for that. And then the third bill, general assistance. We knew going into this session there wasn't much in the way of resources, and clearly there was not an appetite to do anything about general assistance. So really, nothing got done. We tried to tack this into other bills, but again, got word out there that we could use increases in presumptive eligibility to fund shelters by increasing it to 180 days. We were obviously for the 90% reimbursement, which levels the playing field for general assistance across the state, meaning that other general assistance could be more helpful to getting people stabilized instead of allowing people to fall right into homelessness. But that has more work to do. Hopefully there will be a greater appetite for general assistance reform coming up. Other bills that we were following and ended up joining as a committee throughout the session. One was LD 641, is an act to support diversion efforts. It essentially continued the work that was recommended by the Statewide Homeless Council the year before, that was funded by Maine Housing. It might have been 2 years before. Very successful pilot program, and the idea keep this going for $750,000, and also an act to prohibit municipalities from barring the creation of homeless shelters. So the first bill, it did get passed to be enacted. It was placed on the appropriations table. Like many things, it was carried over to the next session. Again, $750,000 to continue this on. We'll have more work to do to advocate. And this bill 731 did have success. Grace and Lookner was the sponsor, and this was signed by the governor. It is going to become a public law after a period of time. And this stops municipalities from being able to stop the creation of emergency shelter as it's needed or warranted by the community. So that's good. One thing to note, through our efforts, public hearings were well attended and also had broad stakeholder support. There's only one of the bills, testimony against. All the rest only received testimony in support of the enactment. And as somebody who's gone to the legislature for a couple decades or more, this is rare that you see a bill that only has people speaking in support. So that, I think, is a very good sign that we've got people working around the state to say the same thing. So it's important. Other bills we followed, funding for BRAP, Bridging a Rental Assistance Program. This was important because it filled a gap that was there. It didn't quite fill the entire gap, but it did get to $600,000. This was necessary to keep people in housing and make sure we have those resources. And this was, although passed to be enacted in each chamber, also carried over to the special section next year. So we're going to have more work to do to get that funded. And then other bills, 52 was to establish the Maine eviction prevention program. This took a big, had a big price tag. It was enacted by each chamber, but again, carried over. And we'll have more work to do on that one as well. And then 1082, something that was created by the speaker, Fecto, and this did get passed, and will essentially change the real estate transfer tax for the first time since 1981, I want to say, maybe it was 83, when the home fund was originally created. And so any portion of a real estate sale over $1 million will have a little bit higher tax on it, and it's expected to bring in about $17 million each year into housing. And some of that it'll go in various areas, but some will go into the home fund, some will help supplement LD2 for housing first efforts. And so that's a really good. And then 146 was something, it may not make as much sense to the homeless arena directly, but this is something that helped us support housing, and the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition really put this one through to cure an issue with the way that the historic rehab tax credit was taken, so that it would be actually, there'd be continuity one in year two to allow more housing to be created. So we spoke in support of that after talking with the and then finally, the bond bills, there were a couple of them. They're big. Neither of them got through. But again, bonds take a lot of support, 60%. So that will be something we'll keep pushing for. It didn't look like that was likely to happen this session, but next session is a possibility. So, and that is it. Let's see. Got to exit. There. All right. Hope you enjoyed my use of subtitles that I cleverly made happen. I can go into the federal stuff if you'd like, just really briefly, if that's all right.
Yeah. Before you do, let's take a few questions on the state stuff, Cullen, if you don't mind. And I do want to ask one question. I had received information from another source that although our GA reform bill was not passed, the legislature, as my understanding, did fill a $10 million gap in funding for general assistance. From the city of Portland, who may know more about this. Aaron, are you familiar with the GA funding gap that was filled?
Yes, what my understanding is that was over a 2-year period, and so it was 4 million, I think, put to this upcoming year, and then a couple million that was for back payments, and then an additional 4 million in the second year of this 2-year budget. So 4 million each of the next 2 years, and then back pay to get it up. I thought around 10 or 11 million is where it ended.
And had a gap, the need versus the supply of financial assistance, or kind of what was driving that gap? Do you have any information about that, Aaron?
I don't have a lot of information. I think it was mostly a compromise between all the other bills, as I understand it, a compromise with all the other bills that were out there, the ones that Cullen referenced, the 70 to 90%, the presumptive eligibility, and so that was one really got added and changed in the 11th hour. That was kind of came out of the last weekend, as I understand it, at least the last weekend, when bills were on appropriations table, there was some changes, and that was one of the changes that was made.
That's helpful. Thanks. I just wanted to at least give credit to the legislature for finding some amount of financial assistance funding for the general assistance pool. I think they should get credit or credit to, and although we want further reforms, at least it's something to highlight. Cullen, do you have any other information in regards to general assistance that you want to add in before I open it up for questions?
No, just the fourth, fifth year in a row where members of the legislature have been putting in a whole stack of bills that had to do with general assistance, trying to help improve that. The 70 to 90% increase passed the last biennium, never did. It was also, something of this biennium, the first part of the biennium. And again, there's a lot of interest to get through. Hopefully the time will come where we'll see the changes with general assistance, given that it resonates with so many legislators.
I agree. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions in regards to state advocacy or legislative matters from the last session from the council members? All right, well, Cullen, jump right into the federal stuff. I know there's great news to share from DC, so why don't you jump right in there and give us what you can share.
Yeah, it's not great. So this bill passed, and it is really going to make a mess of everything related to, I think, Maine, because of its cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. SNAP significant in that it's 20% cut, largest in history, but the Medicaid issue huge for Maine. As folks know, over half of the state budget goes to provide services driven by Medicaid. We get federal match of something close to $2 for every dollar that we put in, and we have foregone opportunities to expand programs or to create programs that folks thought were a great idea and certainly needed in Maine because we didn't have the $1 to put up to get the $2 of the federal match. So imagine when those $2 start to be cut pretty markedly, what happen to Maine's budget, and we really have no recourse as to how to solve that. So this has been something I've been certainly worried about, and others have, but it will cut Medicaid by more than $1 trillion over the course of the next decade. It also adds work requirements, and these work requirements may affect something like 192,000 people in Maine. And it really, as folks were saying down National Alliance Conference, it's really paperwork requirements, and the idea is to sort of hassle people, make it so hard for people that they're unable to continue with the services. But it also puts a lot of burden on people to try to get out there and document all this stuff. And so it's proven to be ineffective in states that tried this. It's dropped enrollments and actually damaged their standing in terms of health outcomes as a state. So that's the big one. So this get passed by a very small majority. And so we'll watch in terms of the the effects of that. And then so that triggers the THUD budget, which is Transportation, Housing, Urban Development. They've been waiting for top line to go forward on that. The president's budget is really draconian. It really wants to change homeless services. It wants to cut, actually eliminate homeless assistance grants funding for continuum of care, turn that into emergency solutions grant or ESG funding, or we've kind of all had employees essentially who know how to work the system, and now really change a huge amount of money, how it goes into a system, into a new one without people there to make this happen. So this is really something to kind of undermine. We want to get rid of block grants for the New Development Block Grant and the home program altogether. And they want to turn some of these funding into block grants, which actually is a recipe for making cuts. So we're pushing back against all this. I think that we're in good with Jason Woolwine down in Senator Collins' THUD office. He's been. I'm just going to try to preserve what we have, but I think that is what we're going to be talking about in the next few years. Is just how to preserve what we have and not lose as much could. So we'll see. So that's the big main thing to talk about. This parts of this were included in that bill that passed, this Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. That's one little bright spot. It's going to increase from 9% to 12%, the low-income housing tax credit, creating housing. But without services, we're not going to see that necessarily helping people in homelessness. So I'll stop this sharing of all this. And I wanted to say also, oops, there we go. That last week there were about 15 people down at the National Alliance on Homelessness Conference in Maine, which was a great showing. And half of the group, 7 of us, were able to go and meet with Jason Woolwine from Senator Collins' office and Sam over in Senator King's office. And we impressed upon them the typical things that we do: funding for homeless assistance grants, funding for Section 8 is our top 2 priorities, but also talking about the need for housing, preventing cuts to Medicaid. Remember, we met with them the day before this bill was passed. Funding for veteran homelessness, youth homelessness, and victims of domestic violence, service funding, including PATH and SNAP funding, and I want to say that, who knows, but the next day, Senator Collins did vote no on that bill. She had been pretty quiet about what she was going to do. I think she probably traded with Senator Murkowski on that, as they often do. But nevertheless, she voted no for that bill, and that is great news. But it did not get the bill. It did not thwart the passage of that bill. So we're going to see effects of this nevertheless. But I just want to thank the folks from Maine for going and taking time out of the conference to go over on a hot day and go and just remind these folks of our priorities, our needs for resources, and we'll continue to do that as we do. There wasn't a Capitol Hill Day with the conference this year. They're going to have a virtual one in September, but this at least got our word in there before they are creating the appropriations amounts. And one last thing, and that is that we're very likely, by all accounts, to see a continued resource for as opposed to a budget by the end of September. So that's not all that bad. It means we're at FY24 levels, a couple years behind, but it's better than the cuts that have been proposed. And it seems like there's zeal to support what President Trump wants within at least the Republican Party. So that's we're avoiding some damage by having a continued resolution, and but we need more resources. Obviously, things are getting more expensive, and we're short on. Okay, so that's a full rundown of things. I just want to thank the White Homeless Council for its support of the policy committee. I think it's good that we were able to speak with one voice on these things. I think those outcomes are not bad. We certainly, helped with the shelter in 1 year, and we got the word out there about the other priorities. And now we just need to have more resources to be allocated to get these things through. But it's nice that we're all pushing in the same direction. So thank you all.
Yeah, I agree, Colin. Thanks. That's a great report. And as always, we really appreciate your and Vicky's efforts to try to organize this with information. If you could share that information, I think you probably already have with Scott and Tara, to make sure we'll post it on the website with their materials from today's meeting. But let's go back a little bit and just review kind of, I think, where things landed, just so people have a kind of a clear understanding. So what was done in the large budget reconciliation act that was just passed by Congress and signed by President Trump are significant cuts to Medicaid and to the SNAP benefits. And what that will do, frankly, is shift the cost burden from the federal government back onto the states. And so what that will mean is that here in the state of Maine, just like in the state of New Hampshire and Massachusetts and everywhere else, all the state legislatures will be left holding a larger bag of responsibility to cover existing expenditures under Medicaid than they had been previously picked up by the federal government. So our advocacy efforts will have to shift now from not only the federal look at Medicaid, but now trying to look at Maine care and how the state legislature is going to handle this cost shifting in Medicare. There's a lot of details to be meted out, and a lot of information I think that's still going to be shared, I think, both from the federal government, from the federal Medicaid office, as well as from the state Maine Care office in the months ahead. So we will keep the council abreast of those information flows as we're getting them. But it is not good news that, of course, that Medicaid is being cut because so much of healthcare is, as we know, disability and chronic illnesses is a feeder into homelessness. And to the extent that our healthcare systems are failing or that rural hospitals start to go down, I think we're going to see an increase in pressure on the homeless system. So it's just something I want people to be aware of. That's kind of one bucket, is kind of food stamps are going down as well as Medicaid, and that is a definite. What has yet to be determined is the impact on the HUD bills, right? We don't know what's happening with the HUD budget. We do expect cuts to be proposed. And it's my understanding that the first look at kind of some of the larger targets will be done in late July. Is that your understanding, Colin? I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah, the markup for the T-HUD bill is expected the week of July 21st.
Right.
Which is
so we will come back to you in the August meeting, but before that, we'll be sharing information about kind of what we're hearing in regards to the T-HUD, the transportation and HUD budget as it affects from the federal government. And what we're expecting is cuts again to the continuum of care, cuts to homelessness prevention, and other types of services. And we'll keep you abreast as soon as we know what those targets look like. So I think there's more advocacy to be done in that moment. One glimmer of hope, however, I'm going to turn to Scott, was that a note for the continuum of care, which is, as you know, the largest provider of funds to the homeless sector here under HUD. The continuum of care typically funds somewhere in the low 20 millions. I think last year it was close to $23 million came to the state of Maine, and we didn't know what the notice would be, and I think it has come out. So I'll let Scott talk a little bit about that.
The actual NOFO itself has not been released yet.
Okay.
There was an email from the SNAP's office just letting folks know that there would be a 2025 NOFO, but not a lot of detail. And considering what we do know about what the big bill says about the COC, I'm very curious to see how this all will play out. The email did specifically mention supporting transitional housing, outreach, and recovery housing. So those are all things that we need. So that would be great, but we have no further details at this point.
Thanks. At least we have at least knowledge that we're going to have a NOFO, and we'll just see what the details look like when we come out. Any other questions in regards to the federal advocacy efforts or the federal bills from the council?
Rich, if I can just add one thing to what Scott said,
Sure.
Under this administration strategy for homelessness, they want to eliminate assistance that goes beyond 2 years. So they're not a fan of permanent supportive housing, which is a proven strategy. This could upend the resources that we have for the long-term placements of people who are proven to be chronically homeless and need ongoing support. So this idea of a short intervention, although some of those things are useful, transitional housing, we know that works for victims of domestic violence, substance use disorder, and is sort of a component of rapid rehousing in terms of the services being transitional. It is not going to do us favors with the population that needs permanent supportive housing. That's a threat, and so that's something for us to watch as well.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that as well. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Andrew.
Just a quick question for Colin. I think I wrote down, Colin, during your remarks about the impact of the Medicaid work requirements, that because I'm trying to get my head around some of the numbers on the sort of state scale and my local scale. You mentioned that a projection of 192,000 people in Maine being impacted by the work requirement, which looks like it's about a little bit less than half of how many people in Maine are on Medicaid now. Is the implication there that that's the number of people who we might predict would actually end up losing coverage due to inability to qualify or inability to comply with the paperwork requirements?
Yes, that's correct. Their Medicaid is going to be at risk. Some will make it through, but we think a lot won't. Where this has been imposed in other states, people fail to be able to maintain their health care coverage. It's a big number. And also the other number that I think is startling, and we told both offices, is that 50% of children in Maine receive Medicaid. That's a huge chunk of the population as well.
Well, thank you for the conversation today. I appreciate sharing all the good news for us at least to know what's happening. All right, well, hold our breaths, and we'll keep holding our breaths until we know more information about the HUD budget, and we'll have further conversations about that in our August meeting. I'm now going to move the agenda forward. Next on the agenda is updates from the Hub, and I see Amy has joined us. Hi, Amy, welcome.
Hi, everyone. The hub level updates, which we're trying to get out every month, were posted to Maine Homeless Planning. So hopefully people saw those, but I'll give a kind of more general overview of what's been happening. I hope that everyone's been able to see the dashboard on the Maine Homeless Planning website. And this has been really great just for now that we have over a year of data, although still not quality data, but it's what the best data we've ever had. Hub coordinators have been really looking at the trends that they're seeing in their hub level data. They're reviewing this with their core improvement teams to discuss why certain things are happening. Like Hub 2 has really been looking at their inflow and what's been happening with that. They have almost sometimes 2-3 times the inflow as the outflow for each month. So really analyzing what's happening. Are they new to the system versus returning from housing, and kind of how to kind of quell that inflow. Hub 1 is currently seeing more exits to permanent housing, which is great, but they want to identify what is actually making that happen, so that they can, replicate that in future months. We're also seeing an increase in outreach in Hubs 7, 8, and 9. A huge win we saw recently is the City of Presque Isle investing in homelessness. That's in Hub 9. They've financially supporting homeless services of Aroostook, and they also are hiring a street outreach position for Presque Isle. PATH has also increased outreach in rural Piscataquis, Washington, Hancock, and Aroostook counties, which have all lacked outreach for a long time. So this will mean that we'll really begin to understand the scope of unsheltered homelessness in those areas, which we just haven't been getting the last few years. And now more than ever, there is increased engagement and collaboration within the hubs. Partners from new sectors are coming to the table, especially in areas of the state where homelessness has previously not been visible. They're also getting more partners engaged in the coordinated entry system, with new homeless service providers, mental health providers, and recovery centers becoming access points or access partners. We're also currently working with the Homeless Veteran Action Committee to integrate the veteran population into coordinated entry. This will create a two-way street to give veterans who are already connected with veteran-specific resources access to the mainstream resources we can coordinate entry, as well as veterans who have entered our homeless response system through kind of mainstream resources, access to those veteran resources. So we've started training veteran case managers on coordinated entry and hope to be fully integrated by October. The other goal with this transition to integration and coordinated entry for veterans is also to reach quality data for all veterans statewide. And speaking of quality data, a few hubs are very close to reaching quality data. Hub 9 recently reached a perfect score on the scorecard, a 29 out of 29. And hubs 2, 5, and 7 are close behind, with only 1 or 2 more questions to be answered with a yes. This mostly comes down to just recording documentation processes, as well as being confident that at least 90% of the unsheltered population are within the by name data set. That's really always kind of the last step, is being confident that everyone actually is being included in the by name list. And for the other hubs that are not yet closing in on those quality data benchmarks, there are a variety of items holding them back, but mostly it comes down to that being fully confident that everyone, at least 90% of individuals experiencing homelessness, both sheltered and unsheltered, are within the by name data set, as well as getting those documented processes. So all providers on the same page about outreach and people who are not consenting to services, how those can be captured and tracked in the by name list. So they're all actively working on these with their core improvement teams, but we are closing in on a few hubs, getting close to that.
Hey, that's great news, Amy. Thanks for sharing all that. That's great. That's really great. Other questions or comments for Amy in regards to the hub reports? So much happening across the state. It's great to hear this update. Amy, when you say that the path is expanding outreach in some of the counties that have not been covered, who are the providers, or kind of what do you have any details of kind of like how that's being accomplished or being rolled out?
Yeah, so it's not really, they haven't, I think, gained more outreach workers in those areas. It's more that from CHCS, Community Health and Counseling Services, is the path provider for hubs 7, 8, and 9. And they just haven't been able to fill the path outreach positions for especially hubs 8 and 9 for a very long time. And so I think it came to a point where they said, we need to cover those areas, so we'll send people out at least part-time and start taking referrals for those areas. So I don't think they're working with a larger team necessarily, and haven't been able to still hire for those positions, but they are expanding their outreach coverage at least, which is great, because we just haven't had, I think, anyone who is really unsheltered in especially hubs 8 and 9 within the last at least year, maybe even 2 years, that are going into HMAS. So
right. So now we'll have better documentation of the actual needs. So that's great. Yeah, and thank the agency for filling in those gaps, even without expanding team members. So that's really a great devotion to the mission. So that's great. Other questions? Please. Go ahead, Andrew. Yep.
Just real quick, sorry, Amy, in case you have anything from, like, I know the Presque Isle story is important for HSA, and I had heard little rumblings about Aroostook County swooping in there, and similarly down in York, about the county kind of taking a little bit more affirmative role and possibly creating a scheme by which towns would be required to support the homeless outreach services, or just, anti-homelessness work broadly. Do you know of any updates that sound like that at all? Because that's a beat I'm curious to follow.
I actually don't have. I have not heard that, but I would also like to know if anyone does have updates on that.
Andrew, I can tell you that in York County, we are starting to explore that and have some conversations. That's really all I have to report, but it is a path we're looking at, and I'll keep everybody posted if it goes anywhere.
Great. Thank you for being available to us for all your work. Share with the coordinator our appreciation for all they're doing to improve the system of coordinated entry here in Maine, and we'll continue to look forward to reports from you next month. So thanks, appreciate it. All right, so now we're going to jump in the agenda to our regional updates. I'm going to just start from the north down to the south. So wondering if someone from Region 3 is on board here today, and I think I saw, did I see Elsie? Is there anyone else here? Who is here to
Elsie and Jenna.
Jenna. Could one of you give any updates from the Region 3 council?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Elsie, please feel free to jump in when I'm finished to add in anything additional. The biggest update I would say that we thankfully have not had to move forward on is the work that we did to rally the community around the potential Job Corps closure. One of the things that we did really quickly to sort of preemptively plan for what we thought was the impending closure of that program was to rally as many community members and providers as possible, sort of in and around youth services, to identify appropriate transitions if that program was going to close, for not only the Bangor campus, but also the Loring campus as well. Very thankfully, it seems that we have a bit of a reprieve on the necessity to move forward with that work, but we do have a small cohort of folks available to jump back in if when the need arises. I have been out for the last week at the National Alliance, their yearly conference, which was amazing. It was wonderful to meet some of the folks on this call too. And at this point in time, I believe that's all the information that I have to share with the group. Elsie, what have I forgotten?
Hi all, nice to see you all. And yeah, no, Jenna, that was great. I think the most recent meeting, there's also a fair amount of conversation about legislative pieces, filling folks in on the policy level. Obviously, a lot of concern as we have across the state around, particularly at the federal level, and then also some concerns. Talk about voucher freezes and that ongoing challenge. Let's see, but yeah, I think you covered most of it, and we'll meet again tomorrow. So it's been a month, and we'll meet again tomorrow and fill folks in on this conversation here and take it from there. Yeah, I think that covers it.
That's great. I do have one request, and it's kind of something I'm going to send out. So my theory on what's going to happen, this is Rich's theory, is that homelessness is a lagging indicator of other social crises, which means the crisis of homelessness oftentimes happens after other things have happened. Unemployment, loss of benefits, a traumatic event, and people try to make it work with their natural connections and resources. When they're not, they end up in our homeless response system. So it's always a lagging indicator. Therefore, I think that when people talk about these cuts that are coming down from the federal government, whether it be from Medicaid or HUD, we will not see immediately this fall, does that make sense, or maybe even this winter. I think it will happen in 26 and 27 as it rolls forward. But I think it's important for us to begin to think about collecting data on the before and after picture. And I think about two major systems that are impacted by homelessness besides our shelter and our outreach systems. The two big ones, in my opinion, are emergency rooms and jails and prisons. Does it make sense? Because both of those also are impacted by homelessness. And so I'm going to call on the regional councils to help us navigate who are the emergency rooms in your communities, in your counties, and where are the local jails and prisons? And are those two systems collecting information as people are entering the healthcare system or entering into incarceration? Are they collecting data on the housing situation of the people that are entering those systems? And I think we should have a conversation on the front end of this crisis so that we can have a snapshot of kind of what were we seeing in 25 going into 26 and 27. So Jenna and Elsie, if I could lean on you to help craft for me a list of emergency rooms in your area, and I can work with the Maine Sheriff's Association personally because I have a connection to figure out the jail situation and the prison situation. But if you could help me on the healthcare side, I mean, I know some of the bigger ones, but I don't know, for example, things in the county or in Washington. I just know Northern Lights and other things in Bangor. But if you could help me identify any emergency rooms in your area, we can start to try to reach out to them for data inquiries. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. Other questions from people on Region 3?
Just to add to that, Rich, real quick, and that's yeah, that's really interesting. And this might be more of an offline conversation, but for example, with in the Down East region of Washington, Hancock counties, we at Healthy Acadia work very closely with both county jails, as well as there's a state part of the main DOC prison system, a reentry center. And we do quite a lot of navigation, recovery services, and also navigation, including housing for folks coming out. So we've got a pretty boots on the ground view, and also work closely with healthcare systems. So as we do that, so in addition to that kind of maybe higher level data gathering, I'd be happy to explore with you sort of our boots on the ground. And I'm sure there are very similar efforts happening underway, and maybe there's particular pieces of information that we can track with those folks on the ground, along the lines of what you're talking about.
That's great. I think that's great, Elsie. Those kind of things are very, really helpful to try to fill in the gaps. Maybe I didn't say this at the beginning. I also think we're going to have our own HMIS data that will show info through our shelter systems and our other permanent housing programs and outreach. But I also believe that we miss people even in the homeless management information system. And what I'm trying to figure out is figuring out what other systems of care or other public systems may be involved that want to, that we can collect data. And I see Alice has raised her hand, and I'm going to turn it over to Alice.
I just
go ahead, Alice.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. A thought I had as far as emergency rooms, I wonder if also urgent care facilities, because for some, emergency rooms are way further away than urgent care, and it's lots of times a quicker wait at an urgent care than at an emergency room. So I think both of those facilities are used for the same purpose. So I just wonder if it would be worth looking at those as well. Just a thought.
Thanks. Appreciate the suggestion. Great. All right. Moving on down to the central part of the state. Anybody here from Region 2 able to report out on the Region 2 Council?
I was not
That's you,
there
Alice?
this month.
Okay.
So Andrew or Tracy, if one of you have updates, that would be great. I have not yet received the minutes from the last meeting.
That was a Friday and heading into the weekend, and Alice and I were both not there. So I wonder if Kevin might be around also if we don't have Tracy today.
I was there, but I was traveling, so I don't have notes.
Summer in Maine, this is what happens. People take the time they need. That's okay. Go ahead.
I thought I did see Tracy though. Yeah. Is she able to unmute? I wonder.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for jumping in late. I wasn't able to unmute. But unfortunately, I was not able to attend the meeting due to a prior obligation as well.
Tracy probably cannot unmute.
I did change Tracy's access, so she should be able to unmute if she's interested in sharing or has anything.
Yeah, she facilitated.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I have a client crisis, so I only have a second. And I don't really remember last month because it was a whole month ago. And I'm waiting for the notes from Katie. I know that we had the options. Was this the options month?
Yes.
Options.
Yes, it was, Tracy.
Options came and presented about the options program in Androscoggin County. We did have a discussion about the upcoming, well, now past Homeless Council, Homeless Conference, and we're going to have a presentation this month about what happened at the Homeless Conference. We had a discussion about concerns about budget cuts and what's going to be happening in the state, and maybe some suggestions for the Statewide Homeless Council. But I don't have those suggestions in front of me because they're in the minutes that will be to Alice and I by lunchtime. So, but there was some suggestions, and there was a really quite lengthy discussion about perhaps ways the Statewide Homeless Council could help. So
that's great. And yeah, just share those with me and with Scott and Tara, and we'll get it. We'll get, of course, all. That you think we should be putting on an agenda for future meetings as we think about these federal changes. I'll be happy to review those. So thanks. I recognize that didn't want to put anybody on the spot, but that's a good update. So thanks for sharing, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. And Rich, I'll get that to you as soon as I have it today.
That's great. No rush today, but if you can do it this week, that'd be awesome. That's great. All right. Last but not least, Region 1, the southern part of the state.
I can start, and then Aaron, if you or anybody else that's on the call, if you want to jump in. We had a presentation from Hub 1 and Hub 2. We thought it had been a while since we got a really in-depth update on where we're at. So that was really helpful, I think, for all of us to get on the same page. And then we talked about the shelter closure, which I don't have anything major to update anybody on, other than I do feel like we have the right partners at the table right now to talk about short and long-term solutions. So I'll be sure to share when I feel like there's something worth sharing. But I feel like we're just starting to actually head in some direction. So I think that's a good thing. We also talked about diving into the conversation and planning for winter sheltering, especially if we don't have a solution yet for the York County shelter in time for the weather, when the weather turns. So our next meeting, which is in a couple of days, we're going to talk a lot more in depth about what that could look like in Region 1. We also was brought up the continuing issue around folks who have step vouchers losing their vouchers because there are no HCVs. So that's still something that's popping up for clients that we're serving. And then at the last Statewide Homeless Council meeting, the report, Lauren, I think you shared around funding. It was mentioned that there may not be money for supportive housing development outside of the Home for Good funds. And so that we talked a little bit about that being a concern for us in that part of the state. Our next meeting on Thursday is actually going to be at Mainspring. So we're going to meet in person for the first time in a long time, and I'll give folks a tour of the facility, and we'll have a hybrid option as well. Anything else anybody like to add?
No, I think you captured everything. Huge thanks to you for hosting us this week.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Emily. I would have one request as well. I know with the closing of the York County shelter, we had a conversation last month when we started it, and one of the difficulties or challenges is that because this is a newly formed kind of planning group and made up of local partners, it's hard for us to know kind of who is the point person for communication back to the council. So as that group is meeting, if you guys could identify, hey, I'm going to be the person to at least communicate with the Statewide Homeless Council on updates. Just, it may be you, it may be somebody else. I don't know who, that would be great to identify.
I'll just volunteer to do that.
Okay, so I didn't want to volunteer you, but I didn't know who would be easiest. So that's great.
Yeah.
We just didn't know kind of how to reach out even to get information. Like before this meeting, I thought about reaching out, and I thought, I don't know even who to contact. So, be the best point.
Yeah, and there are multiple meetings happening, but I think at least I have my finger on the pulse of all of them, I believe. So I'm happy to play that role.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great. Go ahead, Scott.
Before we move on from the regional topic, this is a little off topic, but we had a request to post more information about the leadership at the regional level on the Maine Homeless Planning site. Obviously, I have kept pretty good track of who the Statewide Homeless Council representatives are from each region. I have not done as good a job at keeping track of who the chairs and co-chairs of each of the regions are. So I'm hoping before we move on, each region could tell me who their current chairs and or co-chairs are.
Who's Alice and Tracy? Alice, probably Tracy. Alice.
Oh, sorry. Ours is Vicki and Leanne.
And 3 is it still David and Jace? Yes. Okay. All right. I wasn't too far off.
Great.
Thank you all.
That's great. We'll get that posted to the website as well. Hey, I'm aware we're actually we're doing great. I wanted to jump in really quickly to ask if we could switch the calendar agenda around just a little bit. could we have an update from Kelly on the change in the homeless rule that was on the agenda? Kelly, are you able to join us and talk to us about the change in the homeless rule?
I don't see
She's
Kelly
here,
on
yeah.
the screen. She was going to be here in person.
Oh, maybe that's fine. All right, so what we're gonna do now is, because Lauren is also at the room, and we also want an update on the gaps analysis, I'm gonna take a 5-minute break now. We're actually ahead of schedule, so it's 10:25. Stretch your legs, and we'll be back at 10:30. Take a little break. Thanks. Hey, welcome back, everybody. So we're now going to move on with the agenda, and we're going to get an update from Lauren on a new gaps analysis that the state of Maine Housing are doing in regards to our homeless system. So Lauren, do you want to say a few words?
Sure, and Terry, you can go ahead and throw up the slide. Yeah, so we did have Matt White come and talk to us a couple months ago now.
A month ago, I think.
Yeah, so Matt and his colleague Sarah from Housing Innovations are the ones that are carrying out this gaps and needs analysis. And the cool thing about it this time is they're doing statewide and additionally in every hub, and we've never had that kind of information before. It was really exciting to hear from Amy how close some of the hubs are getting to quality data, because that's just going to help us, make this as accurate as possible. So they are coming to do a site visit the last week of July into August 1st, and they're going to visit every single hub. The hub coordinators are working really hard to gather people in their hubs. Right now, I just have a general, and this will be posted to Maine Homeless Planning, a general like AM, PM. So we don't have all the exact locations and exact times in place yet, but basically this is like Monday, they'll be in the morning, hub 5, in the afternoon, hub 4. Tuesday, there is going to be here at Maine Housing a state level group with agency folks. And then there's going to be hub 6, and they're going up to Bangor hub. Yeah, they're going to see the whole state of Maine. They're going up to Presque Isle, and then of course they need time to travel from Presque Isle. So they'll have travel Wednesday afternoon. Then hub 8, hub 3, they'll come down the coast, and they're going to end actually with hub 2 and hub 1 on Friday. So I would encourage anyone who wants to be involved. We want to hear from as many people as possible. So get in touch with your hub coordinator. And if you don't have their contact information, you can go to Maine Homeless Planning. There's a page called Hubs, and it has a map of the hubs, and it has their all the hub coordinators' contact information, like right here. So yeah, just get in touch and see exactly what time and where it's going to be, and we'd love to have as many voices there as possible.
Yeah. Really great. And again, let's review the end result is a report to us when? Will it be public?
Hopefully by sometime in November, we should have,
Before the end of the year, we'll have something. Yes.
Yeah, and so there's no real prep needed for these. One of the things that we've also already been feeding them a lot of data from what we have from HMIS, from the hub data. So what Matt is actually going to do is present some of this preliminary data and say, like, how does this look to you in hub 1? Does this look real? What are we missing? And then he's going to be talking about kind of their methods to make sure that people are on board, or if they see any concerns with how they're going to carry it out. So I think they're going to be good conversations.
I hate to ask, but I'm going to anyway. As we think about this gaps analysis, how will let's assume that between now and November, we do see a projected cut to HUD's homelessness assistance grants, and we see reductions in continuum of care coming down the pike in the next year to 2 fiscal years. How will the gaps analysis in 2025 take into account what may happen with further reductions in the following year?
Thanks for asking that, Rich. We did plan this before this happened. So, we'll be talking to the consultants about this. I think that's actually a really good thing to bring up. You'll be at the state level meeting, to bring up at the state level meeting, because I'm sure they're thinking about it, so, but it's definitely sort of wasn't in our plan.
Yeah, I get it. It's a complicated analysis.
It is.
When you don't have full information. I just want to be aware.
No, I think that's something we'll absolutely start talking about. I know the COC is doing some contingency planning on COC funds. The dean's having conversations with the directors of all the funded project, the agencies that are funded through the COC. Like, what if we get 25% cut? What does that look like? So there is some contingency planning as far as that money goes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should say that Dean Klein, the new executive director of the Continuum of Care, did send his regards. He's traveling today and was not able to join with us today, but is usually here present. So, yeah, but as you're right, Lauren, there is planning being done at the Continuum of Care level as well for that. So, all right, thanks for that update. It's still good news. I think it's going to be still very helpful for us to get that report at the end of the year and be able to kind of drill down into some details about where in our systems we think are the highest priority gaps and some solutions to that.
Right, and then if we need to do a lot more lobbying for funding, we'll have some actual, like, good, real, kind of current numbers to be advocating for. I think it'll be helpful in any case, but.
Yeah. That's great. All right, any questions in regards to the gaps analysis? Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate the time. All right, moving on. Kelly has joined us. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining us today. And we're here to hear a little bit about the change the homeless rule.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, so I am here to bring forward some of the all the proposed changes to the homeless solutions rule. The rulemaking process is quite a process and starts typically mid-year with the intention to end in late fall so that changes take effect the next program year. So we're in the sort of beginning phases of that process, which is consultation. And in that phase, we meet with the grantees, and that tends to be sort of more robust consultation because the changes tend to affect them the most. And so we've done one meeting with the grantees. We have another scheduled. We're here today to do some consultation with this group, and then we'll also be at the COC public meeting for consultation. This is more of a, it's a formal, informal setting to provide input and feedback. We do, as part of the process, also have a public hearing. So official comments can be made through the public hearing process and the comment period that happens after. This is sort of our way to get all the feedback ahead of time so that we can hopefully take it into consideration before the final proposal goes forward in front of the Maine Housing Board. So I'm just going to quickly cover what the proposed changes are. We did a pretty robust change in the rule last year, and so this year doesn't have as much, but there are a few kind of key pieces that we're proposing to change. There are some definitional changes that are what I consider kind of minor. The rule was missing a definition of HMIS lead agency, so we're proposing to add that in there. We are proposing to remove the definition of housing first in the rule to avoid any confusion between we now have the housing first rule. So it was more of like semantics and confusion that might happen. And so what we did is pulled the definition of housing first out and just more specifically spelled out the principles of housing first as opposed to including it in a formal definition. Excuse me. We are proposing to remove the definition of performance, and I'll get to why that is in just a minute, as well as to change the definition of low barrier shelter. And I'll explain more on that as well. We are proposing to make a few changes to the emergency shelter requirements, which includes a requirement to have adequate staffing levels for safety and service access. It includes a clarification to provide shelter and housing services without preconditions and requirements that prohibit shelter. And sorry, let me stop there. Preconditions and requirements, that's the housing first, sort of the tenets of housing first that we reworded in there as opposed to just saying provide shelter on a housing first basis. Again, that's more definitional in nature. We're proposing to add a requirement that prohibits shelters from using fees charged to guests for program income. And so for those shelters that might charge guests for their stays, a percentage of income or an amount, we are proposing prohibition for them using it as program income. However, some do use it for things like an escrow account for for guests that can go back to the guests after they leave, and that's that would not be included in the prohibition. And then the two big changes, or I think the bigger impact changes are, we are proposing, again, to change the low barrier shelter definition to be more specific about what, right now it just has sort of the intake requirements. So it looks at it from very specifically an intake standpoint, and we're proposing to flesh it out a little bit more to include the operational requirements as well. So how a low barrier shelter would not just allow access, but then also operate. And then we are proposing to remove the performance share of the eShop funding formula. Right now, that's 10% of the funding formula. There's 45 that goes to operations, 45 that goes to stabilization services, and then this smaller 10% that goes to providers that meet a certain performance criteria, which right now is data quality. And we are proposing to eliminate that performance piece, that 10%, and move that into the operations share of the formula. That is basically where we see people using that performance share funding is on operational expenses. And that sort of comes in response to hearing that shelter operation funding is just sort of not meeting the mark. And it is only 10%, but the idea of putting more concentrated effort there. So that was a lot. I know I just put out there, but I will pause if people have comments, input, and again, that's just it's information we will use as we go forward in the process to review sort of our proposed changes and where they land once we get to public hearing.
That's great, Kelly. For those members of the council who are relatively new in the last year that may not know a lot about the homeless rule, can you review kind of what the funding is typically used for and how many providers are receiving that funding in the state of Maine? Can you just tell me a little bit about the structure of the funding itself?
Sure. So the rule itself actually governs any program that the Homeless Initiatives Department administers. It has been primarily focused on eShop because that is the biggest program. It does have the housing problem solving and targeted rapid rehousing program in there as well. But when it comes to these sort of the definitional and the funding formula requirements, we're really talking about the eShop program. So that's the Emergency Shelter and Housing Assistance Program. It funds currently 46 providers, 40 of which have physical shelters. So we do provide funding to providers who might not have physical shelter, but do provide stabilization, housing relocation and stabilization services. So that's sort of where those changes mostly would impact.
Yeah. And currently, of those 40 programs that receive the funding that are shelter programs, they all currently meet a definition of low barrier shelters right now, and these are just, no, I'm trying to figure that out.
No, sorry, yeah, that's a good point. So the way the funding formula works for the operation share only, for those that have physical shelters, if they operate as a low barrier shelter, they receive a bump in their bed count. We pay on bed count. So if they're operating as a low barrier shelter, their bed count is multiplied by 125%. So they basically get a 0.25 bump in their bed count. And so their operations share is a bit higher. And I think we have 16 right now, but between 15 and 16 that are operating as low barrier shelters. So it's not all of them.
So almost a third or about a third.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. That's helpful. Sorry, those were my questions. And thank you for taking the time to review those changes with us. And I think it's great that you brought them for comment to the council. So council members, any questions or comments to share with Kelly?
I have a question as somebody who does not run a shelter and is not an expert here, but I vaguely remember hearing that there was an issue with this related to the not being able to charge shelter guests that goes to program income. There was something related to GA not being able to reimburse for shelter beds unless they were charged, the guests were charged. Does anybody know anything about that or whether that becomes a barrier?
Aaron Gear is our GA person. So that's not a thing, right?
That is on my list of questions to talk about at the next homeless solutions room meeting. But yeah, that was the thing that jumped out to me, Emily, is, and I've got it down here in my notes, is what that does to shelter's ability to charge GA, because that's done on an individual basis.
Is it
No. Well, the rule talks about
their own, from
their own income, not from, income from a GS. Yeah, so at least maybe we can look at the wording. That's why we put this out to folks. But our intention is it comes from people that get SSI or something from their personal income, not paid through another source like GA.
Right.
So, I mean, so maybe.
It was a comment that came up at the last consultation that wasn't worded specifically enough to, and so Ashley, our chief counsel, has helped me try to reword it so it is more specific, that it would not include sources that are coming from third party. Basically.
Right, because that wasn't our intention to include that. That's right. Yeah.
So I was at the first one. I've given my comments. You've heard my comments. You know where I stand on it. My question goes back to that low barrier shelter and hearing that DV shelters just became low barrier in the last change, increasing it to 15 to 16 from what I think was before, like 4, 6.
Yeah.
With the proposed changes that you're putting out this year, do we know how many of them would still be able to remain low barrier based on the changes of like the checks overnight and things like that? Do we have any sort of indication what that would look like?
I think my guess would be between 5 and 6. However, with the changes, what would happen is in our annual application process, we ask the question and then we would then be requiring sort of follow-up policies to verify. So I can't say for certain who would fall in line with those policies as it's written right now, but my guess would be between 5 and 6 of them.
Okay.
And the other thing that we've talked about at Maine Housing is really, with all the uncertainty in funding, looking at these changes this year and maybe next year, doing a whole funding formula conversation, is this working? Does it need to change majorly? Mm-hmm. So this is really, what we thought we could do that would be helpful, at least to some of the shelters. I mean, there's never all 100% winners, unfortunately, but that as we get more information about, what's happening with funding by next year, we could kind of blow up the formula and just start again and see what works for everybody the best.
Yeah, and the thought is sort of starting that probably as soon as this rule is finalized, because that would be a big process.
Yeah, that would be a big process.
Yeah, I just think the checks, the way that it was written in terms of low barrier, isn't necessarily trauma responsive, especially to families and people who have endured domestic violence. Having somebody come in and open your door multiple times a night and check on you isn't necessarily the best way for people to heal. So I would just certainly double down on that. I can see what the intention was, but in the practice, I don't think it's going to be necessarily the way you intended it to be.
I think the intention was more around cost for staffing. So if you have staff that need to do checks in low barrier situations where it's a life safety risk, you're paying for that staffing cost. So we were really looking at this because there's a bump for low barrier shelters. We were really looking at what are those costs that are more for low barrier shelters. And one of them is that staffing to do those checks.
Right.
So, yeah.
Is it, with all the caveats I gave for my first question, is it possible for a shelter to have some low barrier beds and some that are not low barrier? Just knowing that there are certainly shelter guests who do not fall into the category and may not mesh well with folks who do need the sort of lower barrier bed. So does the formula account for that possibility as it stands?
We've never run into that, so I would say it doesn't, although I guess it wouldn't be impossible to.
I mean, I'm clearly imagining like separate buildings or,
Yeah,
you know,
in
like
that
there
case,
would
it would
be.
likely be sort of in our formula, we have separate grantees for every single shelter building. So it's, say Tedford, they're actually 2 grantees,
Gotcha.
the family and the individual. So I guess to that effect, yes, there are some that have a family shelter that is not low barrier and that have an individual shelter that is, and that does account for that. We've never had like a split sort of same building,
right?
Part low barrier, part not.
Would there have to be a certain number of beds dedicated to low barrier in order for, otherwise you'd be recalculating every month?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it would have to be a fixed.
Yeah.
No, it would have to be a fixed, yeah, because we also give the providers their grant agreements with their.
Right.
I'm just thinking too about like, we have a lot more older adults who are experiencing homelessness and presenting at shelters. And again, that just may not be the right fit for some of the low barrier shelters that may exist. Just making sure there's opportunities that are safe for everybody and meeting the needs, the various needs that people have.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, Andrew.
We don't need to dive into this, but I want to just name it in case it's useful for the future. What we encountered this past year with our warming center was the incompatibility of being a safe and welcoming place for people with children and the children themselves, and being low barrier for individual adults. And I can't figure out how the definition is different of low barrier differs in this context versus in that context. But it must somehow, because I don't see how a DV shelter that's taking in families could consider itself low barrier if the person in the next room is potentially somehow not supposed to be near the people in your room. And unfortunately, like the 25% bed count bump, like the stakes are high for every provider, right? We're all trying to make ends meet. And so there's a sense that if you have 17 shelters that are not considered low barrier instead of 5, then everybody else is literally losing pie and can add that up and figure out how much they've lost. So I want to make sure that we can try to be as consistent as possible across settings and types of programs. For example, a permanent shelter versus a warming center. But it strikes me that something, for me at least so far, isn't quite adding up.
My understanding of the DV shelter is that because of VAWA regulations, they cannot check for the ID identification and other sort of statuses. And so by that nature, their intake policies sort of do not require any of those preconditions, is my understanding.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Thank you, Kelly, for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Thanks for doing this process. I know it's long and arduous, but we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And I do have to jump to another meeting.
Yes, I do. Yes. So on the agenda now, we're going to jump. One of the things that we've been trying to do over the last few months is kind of as to cue this up a little bit, is to review what data is available to the council to describe our homeless response system in the state of Maine. So if you remember 3 months ago, we looked at our point in time and our HMIS data to kind of look at kind of what do we know about the numbers of people, the incidence of homelessness, and what do we know about the demographics of homelessness, who's impacted. Last month, we talked a lot about our funding structure. So how much money is coming into the system? What funding from the federal, state, and local entities help fund our array of shelter, outreach, transitional, permanent supportive housing, housing first, and other programs. And we spent some time digging deeply into kind of funding mechanisms. One of the things that was missed last month, and why I've asked Lauren to come today, is to talk now about affordable housing production. We know that homelessness is impacted, frankly, by the lack of affordable housing in our state. And so I've asked Lauren to come and talk to us about the pipeline of development that Maine Housing is developing in regards to affordable housing units across the state. And what do we know about the trends of that? So Lauren, thank you for coming for that part of it.
Okay, here's the chart. So the blue are the new, you can see the numbers like 400, 600, 800 at the left side. The blue are new units and the orange are rehabbed units. So we're preserving existing housing. So it's interesting from this because you can see in 2021, that was sort of just the way we've been going around between like 300 and 400 units, you know, up until the pandemic. In 22, I see, because it takes, 2-3 years for projects to be completed. I think that's where you see the effects of the pandemic, the labor shortages, there were a lot of supply issues. So we had a lot of stalled projects, between like 2020, 2021. So 2023 and 2024, that's where all the funding that we got during COVID starts to kick in, and the supply issues were, getting better, and labor issues were getting better. So that first bar that says 2025, that's just been what's been completed to date. And the second one is what's projected by the end of this year. So we're back up, around 600. We have a lot in the pipeline right now. We have the biggest pipeline we've ever had. So next year should be huge. It's interesting to me that a lot of that is rehab though. So, it's not all new units. And the same with 2027. And then 2028, we get into the more unknown territory. What's happening now is basically all that extra money that the legislature gave us for building affordable housing. That's pretty much stopped. And the housing bond didn't go through. So we could see past, when we get to like 2028, we don't really know what that's going to look like until we see like if we're going to be in the next year or two going to be able to get a bond out there or something. But so it's a lot less easy to predict what the pipeline is going to look like because, we got all this funding and so it went up and now that stopped. So we kind of don't know where we're going to end up as an average, kind of unit per year.
Yeah.
But up to 2027, that money is secure. Is any of that that's showing up there vulnerable?
No.
Okay.
No. Because these are projects that are in the
Alrighty.
pipeline, which means, they came through the tax credit program or whatever program.
Can't take it back.
Yeah, that's all been funded.
Lauren, of the units that are also being produced by Maine Housing, is there ever any opportunity to produce affordable housing that would not come through Maine Housing's pipeline? Like, what if a developer only got a low-income housing tax credit, but no other capital stacking? I can't imagine, but I just want to ask you, it'd be a small figure, right?
Yeah. But usually these deals have
I know
multiple
that's
funding streams because they cost so much. And I did ask the question about the typical unit cost.
Yeah.
It really depends on the type of project. Like, is it a supportive housing? Is it not? Is it a bigger? We have like rural affordable, like where is it? So right now we can't say like this is our average cost per unit because it really just depends on all the different project types. But yeah.
And the Home for Good permanent supportive housing program is part of this pipeline as well. So that's part of the
the projects. So there's the 5 projects that are currently that were awarded are in there.
Yeah. Great. Other questions about the pipeline development report?
Lauren, the rehab units, are those previously affordable that are being rehabbed or are those new affordable rehab?
That I don't know if we have good data on. Okay. I don't know. I think probably a lot of them were, but that's also like when we rehab a mill or a school into affordable housing. So I don't know that we have that broken down really.
Other questions? One of the baselines for this, I also wanted to reiterate, is that, of course, Governor Mills and the state had done an affordable housing assessment that talked about our long-term needs for production of new affordable housing units in order to keep pace with our aging population, new workforce, and other economic developments. And the goal as identified in that report, which is frankly daunting, but frankly also realistic, is that we should have 80,000 more units of housing between now and I think the next decade, right?
Yes.
Kind of thing. So if you take the math, what that means that each year we should be producing thousands of units, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
In order to keep pace with the economic need of our communities. So that is not great news in the sense that although Maine Housing has certainly seen a lift in their capacity and has gone above and beyond what they have historically done over the last decade and should be given credit for that. The other reality is this, from an economic standpoint of economic development and housing production, we are nowhere close to keeping need. And so that will force other people into doubled up situations, and eventually I think will lead to pressurizing our homeless response system as people as the housing prices ratchet up throughout the state, which we know we've been experiencing for the last 5 years. That trend will continue, I think, moving forward. So I just want the council to be aware that this is all part of that dynamic information. I think that's important for the agencies to be given to at the summit, because it's all part of kind of connected in regards to how we're using our funding and what needs to be done in the future.
Yeah, and that's why, I think things like, I'm gonna have to be thinking more outside the box. Even things like we've tried to kind of initiate a little bit, things like shared housing, because there are never gonna be enough like efficiencies in 1-bedroom apartments to get everybody, So there are states that have done really well with that model. You're able to do it with vouchers. It's a little complicated, but you're able to do it. And so if somebody has housing assistance, but it definitely, is a model that takes a lot of time and, to kind of ramp up and to understand and to have it work. But there are some places that are doing it very successfully. So I think those are things like that. We're going to have to take a harder look at those approaches.
I think too, the local zoning changes, like I know, super small town, I recognize, but in Kittery, we have inclusionary zoning in some of our zones now. So it'd be interesting to see which communities across Maine have that and how many units have been affordable and at what level is it affordable? It varies, I'm sure, but how many have been added to our housing stock based on that? And so just so I'm clear too, this does not include other housing authorities in Maine that would be producing.
A lot of their funding comes through Maine Housing. Not necessarily all of it, but most of it, I'd say, comes through Maine Housing.
Helpful.
Other thoughts or questions? All right, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's going to hold it roll up. So that's a good segue now. We're going to now segue the conversation of the agenda and talk a little bit about the fact that one of our major pushes for this fall is to host the first ever, in my opinion, an interagency summit on homelessness in Maine. One of the goals of the Statewide Homeless Council, as statutorily created in 2005, was to provide information, data, and guidance to state agencies and the legislature around the crisis of homelessness. And I thought it was important for us to bring people together. As I said at the beginning of this process this winter, many other states have interagency councils on homelessness where state commissioners sit on a regular basis to talk about the crisis and to do better planning. We know that hasn't happened here in Maine, and we also know that the state agencies have their own capacity issues. People are stretched thin. And so I'm not expecting commissioners to attend our monthly meetings here at the council, but I do think it's not unreasonable for us to ask them to sit down with us once a year to talk about where things are at and the trends that we're experiencing and our recommendations moving forward, which would of course be shared with the governor and the legislature as well. But I think it's important that as we think about state agencies like Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, Maine Housing, others, Department of Public Safety and Corrections and others, to think about how are their own policies and procedures helping to reduce or end homelessness. So that's what I want to talk about today, though, is with the council. How do we think about organizing that day? And I want to share some information with you all. So if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen. I think I'm able to. And I am going to do this. So I just have a really quick PowerPoint slide I want to share. Can you guys all see this? Is that okay? All right, so the Interagency Summit. What does it really mean? Advancing. I am in the slideshow. Well, that's not helpful. There, stop sharing, try again. Well, this may be the best I can do. I hope you guys can see this. So the summit, I'm going to try to go this way. So these are the people that we've invited. So I've already sent out an invitation to the following state agencies, and I want to explain kind of the thinking behind that. Of course, Maine Housing is invited. The Department of Health and Human Services, because there's so many divisions between the Office of Behavioral Health, Office of Children and Family Services, and others that may have impacts on homelessness. I thought it was important to get the commissioner there. We've, of course, invited the Maine Bureau of Veteran Services, the director, because of obviously the incidence of veteran homelessness. We've invited the commissioner of the Department of Labor because we know the intersectionality between employment, unemployment, and homelessness. We also have invited the commissioner for the Department of Corrections because we also know that some people, of course, exit prisons and jails into homelessness. We thought it was important for them to be involved. And frankly, the state former plans to end homelessness had specific areas for different departments, including the Department of Corrections. So I wanted to give them a kudos because they were the last, I think, edited plan that we had from, I think, 2019. Because of the intersectionality with healthcare, I want the Office of Maine Care Services, and especially now that we know that the cuts are coming down to Medicaid, I thought it was important to have actually Maine Care present. I also thought it was important to have the Bureau of Banking and Financial Institutions because they're lending into affordable housing. So although it's not that banks probably fund shelters per se, I thought it would be important for them as a lending institution that maybe thinks about capital stacking and other loans to nonprofit organizations to be aware of this crisis. We, of course, have organized an invite to the Maine Emergency Management Agency. That's the FEMA, the state FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I thought it was important from a kind of emergency shelter displacement perspective to have MEMA available. The Bureau of Parks and Lands we invited because we know that encampments oftentimes happen on public lands. And I thought that maybe park rangers would maybe be interested in what we're seeing in regards to encampments and unsheltered people. And we also invited the Department of Public Safety from a kind of a public safety, sanitation, and law enforcement perspective. I also invited the Maine State Libraries because why? Libraries often serve as warming centers for people during the day and also is a conduit for us to share information with this public. So I thought the libraries may be interested in our recommendations, be able to share that as part of their, if we do a report or a PowerPoint. Then I also thought their staff may have information in regards to how they interface with people experiencing homelessness. And finally, because of the racial disparities that are existing here in the state of Maine, I've invited the director from the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial Communities to join us as well. So those are the state agencies I've already sent out a doodle poll to. And who am I missing?
DOE from
I'm sorry, and DOE was on that list. I forgot to put them on my PowerPoint. So yes, they're on here as well. So I'm sorry. I knew there was a couple that were on my list. No, I didn't. So DOE has been invited, and so they will be invited as well. But that's my question is there anyone that you think I've forgotten that's not on this list?
The CDC fall under DHHS, or would that be?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Separate, okay.
Yes, but we can also invite the CDC director specifically.
I don't think been involved in like regional homeless council
Mhm.
meetings and used to be involved in state.
They were very involved in the HIV outbreak and among the unsheltered population in Bangor.
Yep, kind of. Awesome, that's why I'm doing this. That's what I'm doing. What?
And through COVID.
And go back, that's right. Okay.
Is it, I don't know who it would be, but faith-based communities make up a huge
The
part
main
of.
council of churches.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we have contacted them about stuff before.
Yeah, I had not thought about them because it was more focused on public entities,
Yeah.
you know, the publicly funded agencies, but there's nothing that says we can't add a few that we think may have a larger voice and, you know, stake in the ground. So yes, I think, and of course, maybe what's also not clear, everybody that's on the council will have a chance to take part, and that includes, of course, allies to the council like Greg Payne from the governor's office and the executive director of the Continuum of Care, Dean Klein, and others will be here as well. So those are all part of the mix of people I've invited. This may not be surprising as we have sent out the doodle poll and some people are not responding. So I'm on it. We've sent out a reminder and we'll try to continue to harass these people, but it's not going to be successful. We can't find a common date. And this is not an all-day summit. I kind of viewed this as a 3 to 4 hour half-day summit with, some just coffee and snacks, maybe, and having a half-day discussion with them. So there's that. The 3 questions that really are to be answered are: what information and data do we share once we get to the summit? What's important to say? 2, what recommendations or requests do we make? So the question is, we have this audience, not just sharing information, or is there an ask that we make of them? And then the 3rd question for me is, who speaks? who talks during the summer? There is a potential agenda items that we could review, such as, what is the role of the Statewide Homeless Council? What's the role of the Continuum of Care? What do we know from HMIS data? What do we know from the point in time data? What do we know about the geographical spread of services? So our structure of systems, are they statewide or are there gaps? Would there be a chance to have voices of lived experience during the summit? Would we want somebody for lived experience to come and say something, or a group? We may want to review our current homeless response systems, such as the new hubs and coordinated entry, the spectrum of nonprofit services. Other potential agenda topics could include a historical perspective on state efforts to end homelessness. What did we do before COVID? How did COVID impact us in the last decade? We could do what we've done here at the council and review the financing and public investments. So it'd be good for everybody to understand how much money we're spending and where that money is going. We could look at systemic outcomes from HMIS, what are we achieving with that investment? We could talk about the challenges that we have, where we think the gaps are. We could make policy recommendations, and we could simply open it up for questions and dialogue. Does that make sense? Or some of the things I thought of just really briefly as initial ideas. But the real thing I just want to have a chance is to talk about with you all again are these 3 questions. And this is what I want to take the next end of the meeting to talk about, which is of thinking about the agenda that maybe the outline I've provided, what resonated with you as far as what information and data is important to share? What requests do we make? I think the problem I'm having with the request is the state agencies implement the policies as they're given by the governor and the funding that they receive from the legislature. So it's probably not going to be helpful to go and yell at the Commissioner of Department of Human Services to give us more money, because she doesn't determine that. Does it make sense? The legislature determine that. We can make that request later. Does it make sense? As part of we could tell them we're going to come to the legislature and ask for more money for X, Y, and Z. But it's not. But I think that there is something. At least it's an information. It's still important to be shared with them. But it's still, the ask is where I'm having the most difficult. Like, what is the ask that we're asking the commissioners to do in regards to this information? Be in better alliance with the council, give us better information and data, identify challenges for us, cooperate or align your services with cross agencies in a different way. So there's, we can't ask for things, but I'm stuck on that myself. And then I'm open to having thoughts on who speaks. So I'm going to stop sharing. That was my quick PowerPoint. I hope it wasn't too long. I just wanted to outline my thoughts on the summit as they sit here in July. but we only have a couple months. The thing that always happens to me is I think, oh, September's like a, 2 years out, right? It feels like forever. And then I blink and it's after Labor Day and I have a half-day summit. So give me your thoughts right now, Council. I'll stop talking. Tell me what you think or what you would suggest, and I'll take some notes too.
I think my biggest question for all of us is, what is our goal at the end of this meeting? And in my mind, we have many of these departments listed on our letterhead as part of the membership. So in my mind, this is a great opportunity to re-engage these departments in our work, and rather than talk at them, to really engage them more in conversation. And I don't have any specifics around that, other than I think that asking them to speak about how homelessness impacts what they're doing and how they could see us working together to help change the system, improve the system, which is really, I think, what we all should be trying to do. Like, having that higher level conversation, I think, would be really beneficial, along with maybe starting by sharing the data and what we know. Although, just to dig into that a little bit more, I'm not sure we need to share HMIS, PIT, and all that. I think sharing one data set that we think is the best that we have. I know, talk about data quality, we're not there yet, but in my mind, like, this hub data is really impressive, and I think it seems the most accurate picture of what's going on in our state. So my thoughts are all over the place, but
no, that's great. Don't worry about thoughts being all over the place. We're brainstorming right now, so that's great. Awesome.
The other thing is, when we designed the hub system, we originally based, when we were looking at like how many hubs do we need and stuff, we originally looked at the 8 public health districts in the state, because we thought, okay, there's always going to be a DHHS office there. There's, that it lined up with a lot of like career centers, all sorts of things. And then we actually took a deeper dive into where folks were accessing services, and we sort of said, okay, we need these 9, and we need to leave Brunswick with the mid, so we made those kind of tweaks. But I would be interested to know, and, there are programs like the Department of Labor had under COVID, so I don't know if they still have them, like navigators for workforce development and for folks to get back into the workforce, things like that. So, like, how can their systems work with the system that we have set up of hubs, and like where are their challenges we'd have to work out? But because I think they all have, statewide things, but some of them are going to work with us, some of them aren't. But how can we just kind of look at that together? Yeah. Because the idea of the hub team was to get as many of these people there from representing these sectors as possible. And so I think it'd be interesting to kind of look at that even geographically.
Great thought. Other recommendations? Tom, go ahead. Tom, speak. Oh, Tom, this is one of those meetings where we have to get permission to people outside the council. I wanted to hear from the council first. I'm so sorry, but Tom, I'm going to put, we'll put on the website. Oh, can Tom speak now?
Or do we print out the chat? Can you put it in the chat?
I can open it up if you want me to.
Yeah, why don't we open up the chat also, and we'll keep the running record of comments in the chat as well from here on out. But Tom, I think you can unmute if you want to. Okay, Andrew, I think I saw your hand next. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sure, thanks. One thing that I think is always hard to find, but is always really desired by people outside of the work, is a national perspective. So what are other states doing? Whether it's everything from the degree to which they're operating or subsidizing their response system, all the way to what are their, to what extent are they what are the rate per 10,000 people or whatever the people experiencing homelessness. I think it's okay to get a sense of sort of where Maine falls in the distribution as far as incidents, and then people can decide whether they're complacent, whether they're comfortable with where we are, sort of, given all these other social forces and stuff. But I think there's a really big missing piece around being able to convey best practices out in the natural experiment that is the United States. And even when we tried really hard this past 9 months with the support of people like Greg to kind of dig up more real hard numbers on how states are financing their network, we know there's a lot of variety, and yet we believe there's variety, and you see some particular like cities or parts of states doing big things, but it's hard to find those comparison points. And I think what it leads to is arbitrariness. So a state lawmaker will say, well, we did a thing for your sector, so we have to move on to do something for somebody else now. And there's never an objective goal of how much they ought to do for the sector. And we don't have an easy way to identify one either.
Yeah.
So if that's somehow available in the next 60 days, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think we should also spotlight what's some successful programs in the state. Like maybe have some program people or people with lived experience that have gone through those programs, even if it's video clips or something. But we have some programs that are really working that are based on best practice. And I think it's always helpful because homelessness seems so like huge and depressing. And I think we have to show that some things are working.
I think the lived experience voice is essential. Yeah, data plus the storytelling of these are actual humans.
I feel like I've just sort of reiterating what I said before, but coming out of this with everybody feeling like this isn't, that we're not working in silos, that this really is something that cuts across so many different sectors. And the only way we're going to move the needle is if we all work together. I mean, Rich, you were talking at the beginning of the meeting about getting data from essentially the Department of Corrections and, the emergency rooms. So this is, again, I think an opportunity to re-engage, not just for this 1/2 day, but for, moving forward. And if we can all come together in the next legislative session and have a much stronger ask of, hey, here's how we can together make a difference on this major issue, that would be a really, really powerful ask.
And I think to piggyback on that, like you said, there's a whole list of people that are supposed to be here every month, and a lot of them don't. And we understand that every month might be too much, but I think once a year is too little. What's the difference? What can they, in going back to what is the ask, can you commit to quarterly showing up and sharing that data and talking about what's going on? If you can't do monthly, I think once a year is too long to go without this shared data, because it's going to influence what we do for decision making.
That's helpful. Cheryl, I see your hand. And I just want to say the chat is now enabled. Thank you, Tara. And people are responding. Oh, and Don, so I'm sorry, Cheryl, one more thing. In the chat, Don is asking, it might be missed, but we invite municipalities. Donna, great suggestion, but I'm reluctant to include, the problem is what size of municipalities, who's in the room. I'd rather keep this to a smaller group of state agencies first, and then take that information and share it with the municipality association. Does it make sense after the summit to say, you're part of the solution. If you have concerns, please be in contact with the council. So we will communicate with the municipalities, but they may not be in the room. I'm sorry, Cheryl, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to, number one, say that I can get some data that, like Andrew was talking about, I just got back from DC. So it's current and from different places like Texas, California, Washington, Michigan, different states. So we can get an overall kind of idea. And I'm sure that I can come up with a person with lived experience if you need somebody to speak.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, I just didn't want to lose the day without the opportunity to have them experience it. Instead of having talking heads, having somebody with real stories, I think is a really impactful way to share this crisis with them.
Yeah, especially somebody that's going through it currently, what they're going through on the street, how they're treated. Actually, there's a healthcare provider that's been trying to help people on the street because they've asked so much. It's affecting their mental health more. So it's a challenge. It would be interesting to hear from different sectors. Brains, so we can maybe fix it or at least appease.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. Tom put in the chat that he thinks the federal work requirements now being imposed on people that are receiving Medicaid may be a bigger problem than we realize, and he thinks that asking the state agency to think about how to address this now with clear guidance to our programs would be really helpful. So that's one thing that could be another ask that we put. So thanks, Tom, for that suggestion. Other thoughts or suggestions that are important?
Rich, I just want to throw out there that I know this is a lot of work, so I'd be happy to help you outside of meetings.
That's great. So that was my last thing. Before, at the end of this discussion, you just ruined my last thing. I was going to ask people to volunteer to say who wants to be a part of a planning group, because this will take a couple of meetings, I think, outside. So I'm going to take a list of people. So think about if you want to volunteer on helping us plan the summit. So that'd be great.
Just one thing. Once you have their RSVPs and you know they're going to be attending, ask them what policies and practices and data they have around homelessness. If they have something that makes sense from their agency's point of view, but we know that's not a best practice or that is a barrier to accessing whatever services they might be providing, we can at least inform them of that and maybe influence their policies. And in terms of their data, how are they defining homeless? For example, education. They have a whole component of services for homeless, but the definition they use is very different than the definition that the COC uses or the council uses. And that's important to know as well, so that they say, oh, we have 10,000 children who qualify under our definition. We have several hundred under ours.
Right. That's great. And I think it is, I think we have to be recognizing too, is that some of the people that come to this meeting may know very little about homelessness. Does it make sense? Their attention has been focused on other things. And then some people may come to the table with a great body of knowledge. Does it make sense? But I think it's important for everybody to start with a baseline to say, which is also why we want to do our fact sheet on homelessness, is to share some really important trending data and research to say, this is what we know to be true about the homelessness experience in Maine, who's experiencing, where the challenges in the system are. I think that baseline of understanding is going to be really important for them to have a sense of before we can go on to other recommendations of changes. Yes.
We have anything from the gaps and needs at that point that we can share? Really not until November.
Well, they might be able to do something because they'll have done the site visit. So they might be able to give us something, but we just have to say it was preliminary.
Right.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on just things that you think would be important to share or how we frame this? Go to that primary challenge I'm having. So besides, I've heard some answers, which is, how can we engage you to be better aligned with us and be participatory? How can we get better data information with you? Can you share what you think are best practices in your own agencies and try to get them to talk about some of that stuff? So that's part of the ask, I think, that we're asking them to do. Are there other asks that we think we should be asking state agencies? I think it is enough to frankly say, can you get to the table here at least once a year? Or can you share information? That's a lot for them. I think it at least gets them partly engaged. So I think that's great. But I'm just trying to think about, are there other things? I do have to ask, is there, if we're going to be asking, we're going to continue to ask for more resources, right? Because frankly, we're not going to end the crisis without increased investments of public funding. I don't know how you end homelessness without some level of public investment. Not that public funding is the only solution. There are many community and volunteer responses, but we cannot build capacity without some level of public investment. So we're going to keep coming back to the legislature with new funding. Maybe one of the asks is, can you talk to us as you're developing your budget request to the governor to talk about kind of how much you're asking for these programs and how you're asking for that money and how can we support you in that ask? That could be another way, so that it's not us telling them, It's asking them to be in conversation with us about the budget process. I'm aware of the time. So what I'm going to do now is put into the chat again my email address, which you can all reach out to me at Volunteers of America and just give me any comments. I have for the planning session, help me out, Emily, myself, Donna Alger, Matthew Kennedy, and Jenna Jones all volunteered. Is there any other volunteers for the planning committee?
I'll help you.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else, Lori? All right. Oh, Beverly Hubbard, I see your hand is raised. Thank you, Beverly. Great. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. I know this is always, it's always kind of a rush out the door, but I just want to say, and thank you, Alice, for also volunteering in the chat. I just want to say how grateful I am for people who show up for these meetings. I know it's hard when everyone can't participate. But I also think it helps us as a council really focus on the work that we need to do, which is trying to get to the summit. I also want to make an announcement that one of the things that we're planning to do in the fall after the summit, in probably November, but maybe October, is we're going to focus on the issue of criminalization of homelessness. The Grants Pass lawsuit that resulted in the Supreme Court allowing people to be moved out of encampments, how police are responding. I think it's a topic that we should be talking about. So we're going to set that up for a queue on the agenda, trying to think about what's happening besides the summit. So thank you for everything that people do in your own personal space and your own professional space to help end homelessness. If you work at a nonprofit or community group, please thank your workers for the time that they commit to ending this cause. We know it's hard work again, and it takes all of us together in order to address this crisis. Please reach out to me with any suggestions for future agenda items, and I look forward to seeing you all in August. Take care, everybody. Thanks.